So I did my video on the War Production Board. So after the Battle of Midway, Japan had made about 6 aircraft carriers, while the US made 17. So the US had provided the Allied forces with almost 2/3 of the military equipment they had, which was 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, and about 2 million army trucks. So in 4 years, the American industrial production had doubled in size. So during Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt set a goal for the US's factories, which was 60,000 aircraft in 1942 and 125,000 in 1943. And during that same time period, they had to make 120,000 tanks and 55,000 anti-aircraft guns. So about less than a month after Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt said, "Powerful enemies must be outfought and outproduced. It is not enough to turn out just a few more planes, a few more tanks, a few more guns, a few more ships than can be turned out by our enemies. We must outproduce them overwhelmingly so that there can be no question of our ability to provide a crushing superiority of equipment in any theater of the World War." And they did exactly that after they made the War Production Board, which was in January 1942, about a month after the Pearl Harbor attack. So in order to raise money to help with the wars, the government relied on Americans to rationalize commodities. They did more tax revenue, and they sold government war bonds to individuals and financial institutions. So these methods also helped, not only helped financially with the war, but it also kept inflation low, which Americans were still trying to deal with after the Great Depression, which was about 100 years ago, but it still hit them pretty hard. So the point of the War Production Board was to convert factories into manufacturing plants for weapons and military equipment, and as well to conserve materials such as metal, petroleum products, rubber, paper, and plastic that were being used in the war. So the automobile industry had changed drastically during this time. So in 1941, more than 3 million cars were manufactured in the US, and only 139 more were made during the entirety of the war. So different automobile companies they made different things. So Chrysler made fuselages. General Motors made airplane engines, guns, trucks, and tanks. Packard made Rolls-Royce engines for the British Air Force. The Ford Motor Company performs really a miracle 24 hours a day, because their cars only had about 15,000 parts. The cars they make only had 15,000 parts, but they were in charge of making a B-24 Liberator long-range bomber, which had about 1,550,000 parts, and one came off the line every 63 minutes. So America launched more vessels in 1941 than Japan did in the entire war. In 1944, the United States built more planes than the Japanese did from 1939 to 1945. And by the end of the war, more than half of all industrial production in the world would take place in the United States. So another company that changed what they made during the war was the Matatuck Manufacturing Company, which switched from making nails to cartridge clips for the Springfield rifle. And then they were making about 3 million clips a week. The American Brass Company made more than 2 billion pounds of brass rods, sheets, and tubes during the war. And then the Chase Brass and Copper Company made more than 50 million cartridges cases and mortar shells, more than 1 billion small caliber bullets, and eventually components used in the atomic bomb. And then finally, the War Production Board lasted until after World War II, which ended in October 1945.